a man. Now, do you suppose these are women of age? It seems safe to say. These are not toddlers or children. Okay? Because they were engaged, actually. So at least by Hebrew culture, they were of marrying age. Okay? Now, based on that, he said, take my virgin daughters, they've never known a man. He said, bring them out so that we can know them. Adam knew Eve, and they conceived Cain. The word is the same. And why would he say they've never known a man? They're virgins, they're engaged, they've never known a man. It's to tempt them, it was to entice them, saying, give up this foolishness and know my daughters instead of these men. You have to look at where the word is used. When Adam knew Eve, they conceived a child. So obviously it's sexual. Yes, sir. Of course, that can get kind of tricky because you're going to the Greek now. So anytime you have to switch languages, okay, it can get kind of tricky because then that gives people loopholes. Well, that's not Hebrew, that's Greek, and things are So if you can, maintain within the same language barrier. So if it was written in Hebrew and you can find support for it in Hebrew, stick to the Hebrew. Okay? Does it mean it's not the same? No, it is the exact same. It's not any different. Okay? But think of it as Genesis. Adam and Eve know would be the foundational word for knowing within context of the Old Testament. And then knowing, when you go to the Greek, how Mary had never known a man, that be your context for know in the New Testament. Okay? So try to stay within the Testament as far as when you're doing like word studies and whatnot. Because a lot of time passes, sometimes things change, but getting your context is pretty foundational. Okay? So you have the same verb that is used, the know. Is it a verb? Whatever. A verb, adjective, whatever it is. It's the same word, though, okay? Knowing. When you know, Adam knew Eve, conceived child. It's the same word, okay? That gives us our foundational context. It's the same word, okay? So does it mean sexual? Well, know my daughters instead of the men. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that it's sexual. They didn't just... And honestly, let's think about it this way, too. Could you imagine, at any point in time in history, in the past or in the future, where a group of men will beat down a door to play chess with somebody? Like, no, I saw them from afar and they have to be good at chess. They have to look like philosophers. I have to have what they know. I'm sorry. No, you don't go beating down a door to know someone intellectually. You might send over a letter or your servant say, hey, my boss would like to take you out to dinner so you guys can have a conversation. You look smart to him. You don't go beating down a door. What drives someone to beat down a door? Lust. Is that the only thing? No. But in this situation, it was lust. They wanted to know them. If they had just been something intellectual, they would have sent written a formal invitation. That's what intellectuals do. They send out emails. So I'd like to invite you to my whatever, please RSVP. So, I mean, honestly, the no argument is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. You take all the different meanings of the word no, not in our language, in their language, and it's like they were beating down the doors to know. No, I'm sorry. No. Just no. No to no. Now, that reference for the word no is Genesis 4:1. And basically it reads, now the man had relations, or depending on, again, this is the new NASB. So King James, the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. Okay? That's the foundational basis for the word no, as far as to apply it within context. I mean, it's only from Genesis 4 to Genesis 19. I mean, the word no probably didn't change much. Okay? It's really unlikely. And you have the same person writing it. So when he used it here, it probably meant the same thing later. Just a hunch. And honestly, his daughters, you think they'd really gone their entire lives and never seen a man? They never knew one their entire lives. Never seen one. Never been around one. Yeah, were they literally housebound their entire lives? Yeah. And I'm sure they had windows. And then they peeked out and said, "Oh, that's a man. Looks just like Dad." Guess we do know what a man looks like, don't we? Golly, go figure. Yeah, they had a dad, so they obviously knew what a man looked like. You know, a lot of this stuff is really, really simple. Those are the basis arguments to try to bring up. They'll try to argue the arsena coite thing, you know. For that, I would really recommend listening to Dr. James. He does an argument with somebody, and they try like heck to make the point that no, and I don't remember that. I mean, it was a long debate, and a lot of it revolved around that word, you know. But let's keep it simple, okay? Let's keep it really, really simple. It says, "A man shall not lie with a man as a man lies with a woman." And then in Malachi you read, "For I am the Lord, and I change not." Okay? That verse applies to so many things. It's not about the character of God. Now, you cannot take that verse out of context and apply it places it doesn't belong. When it says, "I change not," it's not about the character of God. Does that verse mean that if God did it this way at one point, that he won't do it the same way later, or that he will do it the same way later? No. That verse does not tie God's hands on how he does things. The method he chooses to do things has nothing to do with him changing. No matter what you do, how you do things does not have anything to do with you as who you are. If something offends you, if something is horrible, like murder, okay? If murder is wrong to you now, in a billion years, it'll probably still be wrong to you then. What do you suppose could happen that would change your viewpoint on murder being wrong? You would have to lose all moral bearing, all moral standards. Okay? So you can't just go out there and just start taking that verse and applying it to, well, God flooded the earth back then, he can do it now. No, that's a bad example because God promised he wouldn't do that. Okay? But God slew the Amalekites. Okay? Wiped on the face of the earth. So will God do that today? No. Can he? He can. Did he promise he would? No. So he absolutely can. But the problem is when he says, "I change not," it's not talking about how he did it. He did things a certain way back then, and I cannot tell you why he chose to do it that way. As far as the Amalekites are concerned, he saw fit to wipe them off the face of the earth, men, women, children. Why? He didn't want them to grow back up. It's when you pull the root out, you pull the plant out, you pull it out by the root. You don't leave even a seed to chance. Okay? Now, who knows better, them or God? Us or God? Anybody or God? God knows better. Okay? So if he had felt the need to wipe them all out and to kill the babies too, so be it. Now, people listening online, that's probably going to sound really, really cold. Okay? Especially if Bobby's listening. I'll probably get an earful for this later. As soon as he hears it. But you could probably argue, why not just take the kids and raise them up as Hebrews? Well, theoretically, that could work. But what if those kids find out later in life that they're not Hebrew, that they're different, and that you destroyed their entire tribe, country, people? What do you suppose they're going to do? Run around to all the other little Amalekite kids who they figure out who the other ones were, run up, round them up, take off. Huh? Elaborate. Yes, he did. Moses is a prime example of that. And he was, the difference there is that Moses' mother raised him to, we think, somewhere around the age of 8. Okay? So she had about 8 years to teach him about God. So he had a foundation built, okay? But for a toddler in that scenario, they never would have had those 4 to 6 years of, being made evil and wicked. That never would have happened. So the chances are actually higher. But it still comes back down to the inevitable. Satan will be working like crazy to find some way to tempt someone, to make them slip or whatever, to find, make sure those kids found out they are not of the root of the Hebrew tribe. And they would have eventually turned. And then your root would have sprang back up. It might have taken 20, 30, 40 years. But eventually someone would have found out, someone would have slipped, and the problem would have come to fruition once again. Okay? Now, God can look at this objectively and say, if I let them leave the children alive, can or will this happen? What will happen? And he can look down and go, yep, hassle, problem, death, heartache, turmoil. Every time in the Bible when an annihilation order was given and it was not followed, it came back to bite them in the hind end. Now, what we're going to do next week we are going to go into the conversation that I had with Bobby and Miss Ashley and Jeremiah. And I'm going to bring up all the quote-unquote contradictions. Some of them I was able to answer on the spot. Some of them I wasn't. Most of them I wasn't. They weren't things that I had ever been brought to my attention. And I have a great deal to say about that. And I've already looked up a bunch of them, and they're so easily refuted, it's not even funny. Like, you'd have to really try to not. Really, really simple stuff. It's just context. Exegesis. If you take exegesis and context out of the equation, you're going to mess up Scripture. But here's the thing. The question that I was asked is someone who's reading the Bible for the first time, let's say they open the Bible to one of these passages, okay, and they read it, it doesn't make sense. At face value, right off the bat, they see a contradiction. Donkeys don't talk. What kind of book is this? Now, here's my question. Have you ever heard of somebody who picked up a Bible for the first time and found themselves a contradiction? Have you ever heard of it? Anybody? I've never heard of it happening. Now, when you have someone guiding you, that'd be a lot easier. But when you have no outside influences, and you just pick it up for the very first time, your first time touching the Bible, and you just open it up and say, let's see what this is about. You're not going to open the Bible to a contradiction, because if the Spirit moved on your spirit to read that book, you will not see a contradiction. I only see what people think are contradictions whenever they point them out to me. There's not that many. People say the Bible's chock full of them. It's like, every time someone does, I start looking at the verses, and I'm like, I don't see a contradiction. Their lack of understanding and interpretation of the Spirit prevents them from seeing the truth of it. But also at the same time, a lot of them don't really want to. Not really. They might think they do, but I'm of the opinion, and this is my opinion, that they don't really want to. There's usually something, people who are dead set against the Bible have some reason to be against it. Something has happened in their lives that they don't really want to. Because if they really wanted to, they really would. But there's some things that happen in our lives that we just don't have an answer for. Sometimes things happen to people, and they'll say, where was God then? I know the answer, but it isn't one they're going to accept. Because the answer says, well, if he just stood by and watched, then it's an immoral God to me. He just let it happen. It's like, until you guys run across that kind of a conversation, you really cannot truly appreciate it. I choked up a little bit on Sunday because the emotion, as Bobby was telling me what had happened, man, like someone just reached into my chest and just punched me in the heart. It sucked. And I didn't have an answer for him. I mean, I had an answer, but it wasn't going to do any good, You have to accept free will and all the consequences that go along with it. I know the words free will are not in the Bible, but I'll go over that too next week. Okay, I got a lot to go over next week. And you know what? Even at that, I've come across situations where I could see it and they still couldn't. But it's maturity in God that allows you to see certain things, It's the act of actually trusting God. He imparts knowledge to you. He gives you discernment. Discernment is my primary gift of the Spirit. He gave me a double portion. It allows me to read His Word and understand it. And as I'm going through these contradictions and get ready for next week, it's like only one of them I'm having a struggle with because I haven't had a chance to go back to the Greek yet. But I want to encourage you guys. And now more than ever, I think it's important everybody get a New American Standard Bible. The King James is good for a lot of things, you know what? But to really, I think getting what we call a NASB or NASB would help a lot. Okay? If you don't have one, I highly suggest you get one. And I have found they're not, I don't like calling them errors in the King James.